This video contains themes of death and a plane crash, which may be distressing for certain viewers. Andreas Günther Lubitz was born on December 18, 1987, in the town of Neuburg an der Donau, the capital of the Neuburg-Schrobenhausen district of Bavaria, Germany. He grew up in Montabaur in the Rhineland-Palatinate region of Germany with his parents, Günther, a banker, and Ursula Lubitz, a church organist. He had a younger brother. From a young age, Lubitz was passionate about flying, so at the age of 14, he joined the local LSC Westerwald gliding club, earning his gliding license 2 years later. However, this was not enough to satisfy Lubitz's love of flying. After graduating from high school in 2007, he moved to Bremen and enrolled in Lufthansa's flight school. In 2009, he took a hiatus from training for several months. Lufthansa initially refused to reveal the reason for this hiatus, but it was later disclosed that it was for medical reasons. After passing his Air Transport Pilot License, or ATPL, written exam, he continued his training at the Airline Training Center in Phoenix, Arizona, between late 2010 and early 2011. In 2013, Lubitz joined Lufthansa's low-cost airline, Germanwings, as a flight attendant before training as a co-pilot. His skill and determination led to his Airbus A320 type rating in late 2013. In 2014, he passed his proficiency check and became a co-pilot. Throughout his training, Lubitz consistently impressed his instructors and examiners, who judged his performance to be above average. Those who knew Lubitz described him as a, quote, quiet but fun person who loved his job and was a keen runner in his personal life, participating in numerous marathons. He had no criminal history. Lubitz lived in an apartment in Düsseldorf with his girlfriend, with whom he was planning to start a family. She was pregnant in March 2015. Unknown to many in his life, however, Lubitz was suffering from poor mental health. He began suffering from severe depression and insomnia. Consulting a psychiatrist and using therapy and relaxation techniques, Lubitz was prescribed an antidepressant. In April 2009, he was forced to suspend his training because his medical certificate was not revalidated by the Lufthansa Aero Medical Center. This was because of his condition and the treatment he was receiving. A few months later, Lubitz's psychiatrist confirmed that his mental health had improved considerably. However, a setback occurred on July 14, 2009, when Lubitz's request to renew his medical certificate was denied, prompting Lufthansa to notify the Luftfahrtbundesamt. 2 weeks later, on July 28, 2009, Lubitz was granted a new Class 1 medical certificate, allowing him to resume his pilot training. Valid until April 9, 2010, it came with a critical warning. It would be revoked if he relapsed into depression. His health worsened in late 2014, when he began suffering from insomnia and vision issues, prompting him to consult numerous private physicians. By early 2015, he had received sick leave notices and medications for a psychosomatic and anxiety disorder. He was referred to psychiatric treatment for suspected psychosis and, shortly afterwards, was prescribed sleeping medication. Because of patient confidentiality laws in Germany, Lufthansa did not have access to Lubitz's medical records, and sick notes did not specify medical conditions. Under German law, employees are expected to notify their employer of an inability to work. Lubitz never did so, for fear of losing his job and the consequent financial troubles of unemployment. On March 24, 2015, at 10:01 a.m. local time, 26 minutes behind schedule, Germanwings Flight 9525 took off from runway 06R at Barcelona El Prat Airport, en route to Düsseldorf Airport. The aircraft was an Airbus A320-211, registered DAIPX, and had logged around 58,300 flying hours on 46,000 flights. The captain was 34-year-old Patrick Sondenheimer, who had 10 years' experience and had logged 6,000 flying hours, of which 3,812 had been logged in the Airbus A320. He joined Germanwings in May 2014, having previously worked for Lufthansa and Condor. He was a married father of 2 children. The co-pilot was 27-year-old Andreas Lubitz, who had logged 630 flying hours, with 540 of them on the A320. Aside from the pilots, there were 4 cabin crew members. The manifest consisted of 150 passengers and crew from 19 different nations, with just under half of them from Germany. 16 students and 2 teachers from the Josef Koenig Gymnasium in Halten am See in North Rhine-Westphalia were among those on the flight. Bass baritone Oleg Briak and contralto Maria Radner, singers with the Deutsche Oper am Rhein, were also on the flight. 2 Iranian football correspondents and analysts were returning home after covering the El Clasico FC Barcelona and Real Madrid at Camp Nou. Finally, an Israeli actor living in Barcelona was among the passengers on the flight. After 30 minutes of climbing, Germanwings Flight 9525 reached its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. Shortly after reaching cruising altitude, Sondenheimer left the cockpit, presumably to use the toilet, leaving Lubitz in control of the plane. As Sondenheimer left, he told Lubitz, quote, "You are now in full control of this plane," to which Lubitz responded, quote, "I hope so, we'll see." Following standard procedure, after Sondenheimer left, Lubitz locked the cockpit door, ensuring that nobody could enter. This has been standard procedure since 9/11. Within a minute of Sondenheimer leaving, Lubitz had adjusted the altitude from 38,000 feet to 100 feet, which he had also done during the flight to Barcelona. He also increased the speed to 560 km per hour, or 348 miles per hour. Although the change in altitude and speed was not immediately apparent to passengers or crew, air traffic control noticed and requested the aircraft to return to its previous cruising altitude. Lubitz did not respond to air traffic control. By now, Sondenheimer had begun to feel the aircraft descending. In the cockpit audio recordings, which have not been released, he can be heard banging on the cockpit door, ordering Lubitz to unlock the door. The sound of passengers screaming in the background is audible. Following changes since 9/11, none of the crew were able to access the cockpit unless Lubitz unlocked the door. Under normal circumstances, Sondenheimer would have requested entry to the cockpit using the plane's phone system. Lubitz would then have granted access using the lock switch. However, on this occasion it was ignored. In the event of an incapacitated pilot, the lock system can be overridden by using an emergency access code on the external intercom. Should the pilot not respond within 5 seconds, the door will unlock. Lubitz overrode the override sequence. The audio recordings captured Lubitz breathing calmly during descent. In only 4 minutes, the plane had plummeted to 14,000 feet. By 10:30 a.m., Flight 9525 had descended low enough to be level with the French Alps, flying dangerously close to the mountainside. At one point, the right wing struck the mountains. After unsuccessful attempts by air traffic control to contact the plane, a French Mirage fighter jet was scrambled from Orange Caritat Air Base to intercept Flight 9525. Radar contact was lost at 10:40 a.m, and just over 1 minute later, at 10:41 and 5 seconds, Germanwings Flight 9525 crashed into the French Alps at around 700 km per hour, or 435 miles per hour. The maximum speed of an Airbus A320 is 871 km per hour, or 541 miles per hour. A seismological station of the SysMAP network, managed by the Grenoble Observatory, recorded the associated seismic event and helped determine the time of impact. The crash site lies within the Massif des Trois-Évêques, around 62 miles northwest of Nice. Because of the remote location of the crash site, the Gendarmerie Nationale and Sécurité Civile dispatched helicopters to the scene. It was immediately apparent that there were no survivors. The search and rescue team reported that the debris field covered 500 acres, almost the same size as Monaco. The largest piece of wreckage recovered was about the size of a car. Initially thought to be a tragic accident, the French Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, or BEA, launched an investigation, accompanied by its German counterpart, the Federal Bureau of Aviation Accident Investigation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, better known as the FBI, assisted in the investigation. Hours after the crash, the BEA sent 7 investigators to the crash site, accompanied by representatives from Airbus and CFM International, an aircraft engine manufacturer. The cockpit voice recorder, which had been damaged but was still functional, was salvaged by rescue workers and analysed by investigators. 1 week after the incident, Bryce Robin, the government prosecutor based in Marseille, announced that the flight data recorder, which was also damaged but still usable, had been recovered. Investigators isolated 150 sets of DNA, which were compared with the families of the victims. Within 2 days of the incident, French and German prosecutors announced that their investigation had established that the plane had been deliberately crashed by its co-pilot, 27-year-old Andreas Lubitz. 3 days after the crash, authorities searched Lubitz's home and removed a computer and other external hard drives for analysis. They found no suicide note, nor any evidence that the crash was motivated by political or religious ideologies. German detectives found a letter written by Lubitz's doctor declaring him unfit to work. The following day, authorities visited Lubitz's home again and found evidence that he suffered from a psychosomatic illness, for which he had been prescribed the antidepressants metazapine and escitalopram, as well as the sleeping medication Zopiclone. Toxicology examination of Lubitz post-mortem confirmed the presence of all 3 medications. Escitalopram is, ironically, associated with an increased risk of suicidal thoughts and behaviours, especially after the beginning of treatment. Lubitz was prescribed this medication only 9 days before the crash. The BEA published its preliminary report on May 6, 2015, 6 weeks after the crash. The report confirmed the initial analysis of the aircraft's flight data recorder and revealed that during the earlier outbound Flight 9524 from Düsseldorf to Barcelona, Lubitz had adjusted the autopilot altitude to 100 feet, again while Captain Sondenheimer was out of the cockpit. On March 13, 2016, nearly a year after the incident, the BEA published its final report. This report confirmed the findings in the preliminary report and concluded that Andreas Lubitz had crashed the Airbus A320 in a case of murder-suicide. It concluded, quote, "The collision with the ground was due to the deliberate and planned action of the co-pilot, who decided to commit suicide while alone in the cockpit. The process of medical certification for pilots, in particular self-reporting in case of a decrease in medical fitness between 2 periodic medical evaluations, did not succeed in preventing the co-pilot, who was experiencing a mental disorder with psychotic symptoms, from exercising the privilege of his license." 1 day after the crash, Lufthansa Chief Executive Officer Carsten Spohr visited the crash site, describing the previous day as, quote, "the darkest day for Lufthansa in its 60-year history." Several Germanwings flights were cancelled on March the 24th and 25th because of the pilots' grief at the murders and the loss of their colleagues. Germanwings retired the flight number 4U9525 and replaced it with 4U9441. The outbound flight number was changed from 4U9524 to 4U9440. In the days following the crash, Lufthansa stated that it saw no reason to change its procedures. However, it reversed this earlier statement by introducing a new policy across all of its airlines, requiring the presence of 2 crew members in the cockpit at all times. In response to the incident and the circumstances of the co-pilot's involvement, aviation authorities in some countries implemented new regulations requiring the presence of 2 authorized personnel in the cockpit at all times. On March 27, 2015, 3 days after the incident, the European Aviation Safety Agency issued a temporary recommendation for airlines to ensure that at least 2 crew members, including 1 pilot, stayed in the cockpit for the entire duration of the flight. Several airlines stated that they had already introduced similar policies. By 2016, the EASA had stopped recommending the 2-person rule, instead advising airlines to undertake risk assessments and decide for themselves whether to implement it. By 2017, Germanwings and other German airlines had abandoned this procedure. Lufthansa, the parent company of Germanwings, offered victims' families an initial aid payment of €50,000, separate from any statutory compensation for the crash. Lufthansa's insurance company set aside $300 million, or €280 million, for financial compensation to the victims' families and to cover the cost of the aircraft. By 2017, Lufthansa had paid €75,000 to the family of every victim, as well as €10,000 in pain and suffering compensation to every close relative of a victim. On March 24, 2017, the 2nd anniversary of the incident, the Lubitz family held a press conference during which Günter Lubitz, Andreas Lubitz's father, stated that the family did not accept the findings that Andreas Lubitz was responsible for deliberately crashing Germanwings Flight 9525, killing himself and all 149 passengers and crew, or that he was depressed at the time of the crash. Günter said he had been working alongside journalist Tim van Beveren, who was present at the conference and whom he called, quote, an internationally recognized aerospace expert, to promote a theory which stated that a carbon monoxide leak in the cockpit disabled Lubitz while Captain Sondenheimer was out of the cockpit. The timing of the press conference, on the 2nd anniversary of the crash, was roundly criticised and condemned by victims' families, who were holding their own remembrances that day. On March 24, 2025, the 10th anniversary of the crash, memorial services were held in France, Germany and Spain. To commemorate a decade since the incident, German broadcaster ARD produced a 4-part documentary called The Germanwings Crash.